At the Christmas party, my millionaire son hugged me and said, "Enjoying the $1,000 a month, Mom?" So I smiled. Have you ever been handed a gift that felt more like a receipt? Picture this. You're standing in a luxury ballroom, jazz playing soft in the background, and your daughter-in-law hands you a box wrapped in gold ribbon. Inside, a real estate transfer form with your name already signed. "Merry Christmas," they said. They told me I was an investment in legacy. But behind the smiles, they were quietly filing papers to own the last thing I still had: my land, my home, my name. I used to believe staying silent was strength, that love meant giving without asking for anything back. But this time, I didn't raise my voice. I raised a pen, and I took it all back. Because sometimes the softest voice in the room is the one that finally says, no. If you've ever felt overlooked, especially by those you love most, stay with me, subscribe and share this story so that no elder is ever treated like an afterthought again. My name is Maureen Ellison. I'm 73, and I've spent most of my life believing that if I just kept giving my time, my care, my savings, love would hold. I raised one son. His name is Silas. Kind boy, soft-hearted, or at least he used to be before life got too fast and his wife learned how to talk for both of them. This isn't a story about betrayal. Not exactly. It's a story about how quickly love can be packaged, redirected, and signed away when you stop asking questions. I never saw it coming. Not when they bought me the coat. Not when they said, "You don't need to work anymore." Not even when they handed me that thick envelope and said, "It's just for your comfort, Mom." But what I didn't say at the time is what matters now. It never felt like a gift. It felt like permission for me to disappear quietly. This story isn't loud. There are no screaming matches or courtroom battles, just quiet rooms, half-empty coffee cups, and a woman who learned that being polite has a price tag. If you've ever known someone who gave too much, too long, hoping it would buy them love, then you already know me. And if you stay with me, maybe you'll see how I found my way back. "Enjoying the 10 grand, Mom?" Delilah said as she hugged me, right in the middle of the Christmas party. I smiled. No one noticed how cold my hands were. The room sparkled, mirrors reflecting golden light, a grand chandelier dripping crystals like icicles. The air smelled like wine and cinnamon, and something far more expensive than anything I'd ever cooked. I stood near the edge of the ballroom, next to a decorative fireplace that didn't give off heat, clutching a clutch that wasn't mine. Delilah had handed it to me in the car, said it would match better than the leather one I always carried. I hadn't argued. Silas had called a car to pick me up from the station. Not that he came himself. That would have meant stepping away from his endless calls or Delilah's meetings. I hadn't been on a bus in nearly a year, but the routes hadn't changed. Neither had the smell. Dust, old coffee, winter boots. The hotel, though, was like another planet. A young man in a velvet vest handed me a champagne flute when I walked in. I told him I didn't drink. He looked confused, then slightly annoyed, like I declined a sacred ritual. I asked if they had tea. He pointed toward the bar with a smirk and walked away. I made my way slowly to the back wall, behind a pillar wrapped in fairy lights. From there, I watched them. Silas, tall, still soft-eyed, though his suits had gotten sharper. Delilah, sleek, confident, moving through conversations like she'd choreographed the entire night. Maybe she had. Someone brushed past me, offering a quick, "Excuse me." I nodded, trying not to feel invisible. Silas eventually spotted me and made his way over, a half smile on his face. "Hey, Mom, you made it." "I did," I said. "Traffic wasn't too bad?" "I took the bus." "Oh." He blinked, then glanced around. You should have told me. I had. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek envelope, and handed it to me without ceremony. This is for you. Just a little something. I opened it later. 10 crisp bills. 1,000 each. No note. Just money. We've got it covered, Mom. You don't need to work anymore, he said, his voice kind but practiced. I looked at him, really looked. There was a time I could read everything in his face. Now, it was like a window that had been tinted. He kissed my cheek and turned back toward the crowd. The dinner was plated. Tiny things arranged with tweezers, probably. I missed meatloaf. Delilah gave a speech halfway through, her tone glossy. She thanked the staff, the partners, then pivoted. And of course, let's not forget Maureen, she said, gesturing toward me. An investment in legacy. A woman who gave so much, so we could build more. The room clapped. I nodded. That's what you do when you're thanked like a statue. I noticed someone whisper to their neighbor, something about my dress. I had sewn it myself, years ago, and restitched the hem 2 nights before. Navy blue. Too warm for the ballroom, but it hid the lines on my arms. I left my plate half full. No one noticed. I asked again about tea. This time, someone handed me a peppermint cocktail. I left it on a side table and returned to my pillar. I watched the servers refill flutes, the pianist cycle through jazzy carols. The guests talk louder as the wine flowed. There was laughter, flashes of phone cameras, the occasional clang of silverware on tile. And beneath it all, that ache I knew too well. The one that sits just beneath your ribs when you realize you're a guest at your own life. Silas passed by once, waved. Delilah brushed my shoulder with her hand. You look lovely, Maureen, and kept moving. I stood there, holding that envelope in my purse, pretending I didn't hear someone whisper behind me. She's adorably old-fashioned. I smiled. Because what else was I supposed to do? Then it happened. Delilah appeared beside me again, holding her phone at just the right angle. She looped her arm through mine as if we were best friends, flashing her polished smile to someone across the room. Maureen, come here for a second, she said, already guiding me toward a cluster of guests with glasses raised high. I didn't catch any of their names. They didn't ask for mine. A photographer hovered nearby. Delilah leaned in and wrapped her arms around me, tight enough to press the sequins of her dress into my shoulder. Enjoying the 10 grand, Mom? She said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. I smiled. The camera clicked. Everyone chuckled. No one saw how my fingers clenched around that little clutch, how the edges dug into my palm. Delilah moved on before I could answer. Not that she waited for one. She drifted into another group, her laughter trailing behind her like perfume. I stayed frozen, the smile still stuck to my face. Around me, conversations flowed easily. Words like real estate pivot and upside risk floated through the air. Someone beside me talked about Aspen plans for the new year. Another laughed about their second Tesla being too smooth. I adjusted the sleeves of my dress. The hem was holding up, at least. That had been my project 2 nights ago, sitting by the kitchen window with my old Singer machine, stitching under the yellow light. They thought the money was kind, a gesture, like giving a dog a bigger bowl and calling it love. But it wasn't kind. It was a cage made of courtesy. You don't need to work anymore, they said. We've got it covered. They didn't know I liked working. At the diner, I had friends. That pouring coffee and wiping counters gave my day shape. That strangers tipped me more than my own son ever did with words. But I said nothing, because saying something would make me rude. After dinner, when the music got louder and the floor cleared for dancing, I told a server I was heading up to the room. He looked relieved not to have to explain another drink menu. My suite was too large, a sterile kind of fancy. Gray everything, Walls, carpet, even the lampshades. The pillows were heavy with scent. Lavender, I think, though it smelled more like something trying to be calm. I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my shoes. My feet were swollen, but I didn't mind the ache. It reminded me I'd moved through the day on my own terms, even if barely. The envelope was still in my purse. I took it out and laid it on the nightstand. Next to it, I pulled out my old notebook, soft brown leather, creased at the spine. I hadn't written in it in a while, not since the day I sold the rocking chair and paid off the last bit of the plumbing bill. I opened a clean page. With a pen that still worked, I started to write. 2006. Subaru still runs. The house in Holleridge needs a new roof. 2 boxes of cookbooks. 1 slow cooker. The blue photo album with the tape coming loose. Grandma's quilt. 3 jars of blackberry jam. Half a jar of instant coffee. Notebook, this one. I paused, then added, whatever self-respect I can still patch together. The window was frosted, even from the inside. Below, I saw silhouettes moving under street lamps. Some were couples holding hands, some alone, hurrying through the cold. I didn't cry. I was too tired for that, too practiced. I just kept listing, quietly, 1 line at a time. That night, back at the hotel room, I took out my old notebook and wrote down everything I still owned. Starting with the 2006 Subaru and the land in Hollow Ridge, I just kept listing, quietly, 1 line at a time. I left Seattle before dawn. On the Greyhound, a teenager asked if I was someone famous. I smiled. No, honey, just someone real. She nodded like that made sense. Kids these days didn't need much to believe you'd once been something, even if all you had was a decent coat and a straight posture. The ride out of the city was quiet. Fog pressed against the windows. By the time we crossed the state line, most passengers were asleep or buried in their phones. I stayed awake, fingers folded around a lukewarm paper cup of bus station coffee, staring out at the land that stretched farther and wider the longer we drove. Montana snow is different, less polite than Seattle's drizzle. It doesn't ask permission. It just arrives and settles in like it owns the place. By the time we rolled into Holleridge, the roads were lined with powder, and even the plastic reindeer on rooftops looked a little tired. I got off the bus, shouldered my bag, and walked the half-mile home without slipping. Muscle memory. The porch light flickered when I flipped it on. I stood there a moment before unlocking the door, breathing in the kind of cold that wakes your bones. Inside, the heat kicked in slowly. I lit the small lamp in the kitchen, warmed up leftover stew from last week, and listened to the radiators tick back to life like old friends clearing their throats. The next morning, I walked into Maggie's diner just as the sun touched the edge of the mountains. Odette was already at our table, the booth under the window that looked out on the post office and the blinking pharmacy sign. She wore her usual denim jacket over 2 layers of flannel, lips pressed tight, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. "You look like someone who's been hugged too hard by fake people," she said. I sat down, peeling off my gloves. "That's about right." The waitress, a sweet girl named Candace, smiled when she saw me. "Your usual, ma'am?" I nodded. "And some of those gingerbread pancakes if they're still making them." "Sure are," she said, already jotting it down. Odette raised a brow. "Are you celebrating something?" I pulled the envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. Her fingers didn't twitch, but I saw the shift in her eyes. 10,000? She asked it. "Gift," I said. "That's what Delilah called it." Odette snorted. "Rich people don't give gifts. They redistribute burdens." I half laughed, half sighed. She opened the envelope and looked at the check, then turned it over as if expecting a catch on the back. Did you sign anything? She asked. Not a thing, I said. At least, not that I remember. She shook her head. That's what scares me. The pancakes came. So did the coffee refill. We ate quietly for a while. Around us, the diner was filled with regulars. A man at the counter wished the cook a Merry Christmas. Someone dropped change into the Salvation Army kettle by the door. I felt almost normal again. But Odette wasn't done. You still have that land deed? She asked. In my bag. She motioned. Let's see it. I pulled out the manila folder, thick with old paperwork and scribbled notes. She sifted through it until she found the document, holding it up to the light like a jeweler inspecting a stone. There, she said, tapping a name I hadn't noticed. What is it? Second party, not just Silas's trust fund. Look. I leaned in. The print was small, but there it was. Delilah's name, right next to my son's. Why would she be on it? I asked. Odette folded the paper slowly, as if giving the question time to settle. Because she wants to own what you won't sell, she said. I've seen this before. The soft kind of theft. We finished eating. Odette paid with a coupon and tipped in cash, slipping it under the mug like always. She hated leaving money in plain sight. Said it made people feel like charity cases. Outside, the wind was a bit harder than before. I pulled my wool cap down over my ears and turned my collar up. We walked down the block toward her car, her steps sure and steady despite the patches of ice. In the passenger seat, I sat still for a moment. My hands rested on the sealed envelope again. The number on that check felt heavier now, like it had been dipped in cement. What was I really being paid for? Odette started the car, heater groaning awake. Have you ever heard of someone using a power of attorney without permission? I asked, and her grip on the steering wheel tightened. Too many times, especially with women our age. People assume we won't check the fine print. I looked out at the snow-dusted streets, the wreaths in shop windows, the blinking lights that made everything seem sweeter than it was. You think Silas knows? I think Silas stopped reading his own bank statements 10 years ago. That stung, because it was probably true. Odette pulled into the post office parking lot so I could check my mailbox. Nothing inside but 2 grocery ads, a church bulletin, and a small box with a return address from Seattle. I opened it on the bench outside, the cardboard damp with cold. Inside was a printer, sleek, shiny, way too much for someone who didn't even own a laptop. There was a note, printed, not handwritten. For home use. Figured you'd need this now. Love, Silas, and Delilah. Need it for what? I muttered. Odette peeked over. That's the kind of gift people send when they've already used your signature for something. Back at the house, I set the printer on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it might confess. It didn't. I made tea, the kind Delilah never liked. Black, strong, no sugar. I sat at the table, paper spread out again, reading line after line of legal jargon until my head throbbed. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I never signed over anything, and yet somehow Delilah's name was stitched into my affairs like a label I didn't remember sewing. That's when the memory came big, vivid, sharp. Delilah, at the party, brushing a hand over my arm. Her voice dipped just enough for the cameras to hear, but not the meaning behind it. Enjoying the 10 grand, Mom? She said it like it was kindness. But the more I replayed it, the more it sounded like ownership. Odette stopped by later that evening with 2 things, a thermos of lentil soup and a name. Enoch, she said. He's not practicing anymore, but he still knows the system. Helped me out when my sister tried to claim my annuity. I nodded, setting the thermos down gently. Do you trust him? With my life, And that's not a sentence I hand out lightly. I stood up, pulled on my boots, my coat, my gloves. Take me to Enoch, I said. The revocation letter was signed. Odette lit the stove and said, We're just getting started, old girl. Maureen, I worked with your father's generation, Enoch said. And I've never seen anyone fax a power of attorney. He slid the sheet across the desk, yellowed at the edges, but the signature fields looked too clean, too modern. I recognized my name, but not in my own hand. It had the right loops, the right pressure, but it wasn't mine. Odette leaned forward, squinting. Filed through an online notary, huh? Enoch nodded. A fairly new thing, legal in most states if done properly. This one? Questionable. The office was warm, but not from central heat. A squat wood stove breathed out the kind of heat you could only earn by chopping logs yourself. The walls were lined with books, hardbound, some peeling, all used. It smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and something like coal dust clinging to history. Enoch Rydell wasn't what I expected. His voice carried no urgency, no panic, just weight. The kind that came from knowing how many times people like me had been brushed aside. He tapped the paper again. You see this line here? Partial transfer of mineral rights pending confirmation of custodial POA. That's not language your son would use. No, I said softly. That's Delilah's tongue, polite and sharp. He looked at me, not unkindly. You didn't sign this? I didn't even see it until today. He nodded once, slow. Then he pulled open a drawer and brought out a magnifying glass, the kind you might expect in a Sherlock Holmes story. He hovered it over the ink. The printer they used wasn't high-end. Look at the fuzziness here. They copied your signature from another document. I swallowed. What can I do? You still have rights, he said. But you'll need to move fast. Odette shifted in her seat. Tell her. He sat back. First, we draft a formal revocation of power of attorney. That severs their control going forward. Then we get a notarized doctor's letter affirming your mental competence. That's your insurance. You're not just lucid, you're aware. I nodded. Let's do it. There wasn't anger in me yet. Not the kind that boils over. Just a slow heat. The kind that rises from deep in the belly and makes you straighten your back without realizing it. Enoch pulled a folder from his briefcase. Not a computer bag. An honest-to-God leather briefcase with a brass clasp. He handed me a stack of documents, all typed in a font that hadn't been fashionable in decades. You'll want to read them, he said. But they're written plain. No hidden traps here. I skimmed. The language was sturdy. It said what it meant. I reached for his pen. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? I'm not angry, I said, signing the first page. I'm just done being quiet. Odette didn't smile, but I saw the corner of her mouth lift slightly. She had been waiting for this version of me to come back, the one who didn't flinch at signatures or paperwork or polished threats. Enoch pressed the final page through his old printer. The thing wheezed like it had asthma, but it worked. The ink was uneven, fading in places, but the words were there, legal, solid. I'll file the revocation with the Jefferson County Recorder's Office this afternoon, he said. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. I nodded. And the doctor's letter? He gestured toward a rotary phone on his shelf. Dr. Hale's son runs the clinic now, still honors his father's old patients. I'll call him. He'll do a competency check, respectfully. You'll be treated like a person, not a checkbox. Odette looked at me. Are you okay with that? I breathed in the scent of wood smoke and old ink. Yes, I want it in writing. The three of us sat in quiet agreement for a moment, listening to the wind knock against the windows, Outside, snow blew sideways across the alley, catching the light from the antique clock shop next door. Time marched on, even in places that smelled like 1957. Enoch began folding the revocation letter, slipping it into an envelope. His fingers, knotted from age, moved with the precision of someone who never lost the habit of care. He sealed the flap and pressed his thumb along the edge. "Whoever did this," he said, "counted on your silence." "Well," I said, "they counted wrong." Back at Odette's cabin, the cold hit sharper. She opened the door and let me in first. The stove in the corner was already lit, flames dancing behind the glass like they knew something we didn't. She tossed in another log and crouched to adjust the vent. The warmth came quickly, so did the quiet. We didn't speak for a while. She handed me a mug of cider, still steaming. I took it with both hands, the heat sinking into my palms like medicine. "I don't know what this'll cost," I said quietly. She shook her head. "You don't measure in dollars anymore. You measure your spine." I looked down at the envelope resting on her table, addressed, sealed, ready. The revocation letter was signed. Odette lit the stove and said, "We're just getting started, old girl." After the letter was signed and the fire stoked, I sat quietly with my cider, letting the heat sink deeper into my bones. Odette busied herself with folding laundry, her eyes drifting back to me now and then, as if to confirm I was still steady. "You remember when your water heater gave out in '92? She asked. I looked up. "Of course. You brought over that tin kettle and made me boil water by the fireplace for a week." Odette chuckled. "You never once asked for help. You just kept boiling." I nodded. "Well, pride doesn't heat a bath, but it keeps your back straight while you're freezing." She folded a dish towel and placed it on the stack. "That's what this is, you know. Just another frozen winter. One you get through." I didn't reply. Not right away. There was something growing inside me that I didn't have a name for. It wasn't just anger or hurt. It was the sharp edge of awareness, the kind that comes when you realize someone's been narrating your life for you, and it's time to take back the pen. I stared at the flames, remembering how Delilah had placed her hand on my shoulder at the party, how her grip tightened for just a second when the photographer raised the camera, like she was posing me. A display. That's what I had been. Not a mother. Not a woman who'd raised a boy alone. Not a person who knew the price of every skipped lunch and overdue bill she ever paid so he could go to college. No, I was the closing line of their holiday toast. A legacy. I looked down at my palms, fingers dry and creased. The hands of someone who scrubbed counters and stitched torn sleeves instead of paying for replacements. There was strength in them still. I just needed a reason to remember it. Enoch's envelope still sat on the table. I picked it up and held it to the light. The edges were damp from the humidity of the stove, but the ink held. My name, my words, my refusal. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Thick flakes, slow and deliberate. Odette stepped out for firewood, leaving the door ajar just long enough for a draft to sweep in. It brushed against my cheeks and reminded me I was alive. I walked to the window. Down the road, the post office flag hung limp in the twilight. By morning, that letter would be en route, slipping through mail slots and bureaucracies like a whisper turning into thunder. They wouldn't see it coming. That was the best part. On December 21st, a large ribbon-wrapped box arrived at my door. Inside, a pre-filled real estate transfer form and a Christmas card that read, "Let's make this official. Merry Christmas, Mom. Delilah and Silas." I stared at it longer than I cared to admit. The paper was heavy stock, off-white with a gold trim, and the card was scented, like some department store display meant to evoke cinnamon nostalgia. It didn't smell like home. It smelled like theater, There was no return address, just the form, filled out in blue ink, ready for my signature. All I had to do was write my name in the space marked Grantor and surrender the last real thing I owned. Odette was already knocking before I had the chance to close the lid. Her boots stomped snow across the threshold. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I turned the card toward her. She read it once, then again, then placed it carefully back into the box without a word. The silence stretched. Outside, the trees crackled with ice. Holleridge had been hit with a cold snap, the kind that made even the dogs walk with hesitation. Most shops were shuttered. The diner only opened 4 hours a day now. The post office ran on holiday hours and hope. Inside my house, I lit the oil lamp that once belonged to Walter. Its glass shade had a small crack running up the side, but the flame danced strong. That lamp had seen me through blizzards, power outages, and more than one night of crying into a cup of cocoa. Tonight, it gave off a steady light. The phone rang. I knew who it was before I picked it up. "Hi, Maureen," Delilah's voice sang, sugar slick. "Did you get our little Christmas gift?" I didn't answer immediately. The lamp's glow flickered along the edge of the paperwork. My thumb rested on the place where they wanted my signature. "I saw it," I said. "Great," she chirped. "It's just paperwork, really. Formalities. You've earned this kind of ease, you know? Ease doesn't need a deed transfer." She paused, just enough to let the mask slip. "Maureen, come on. We've got big plans for that land. You'll still be part of everything, just without the pressure." I almost laughed. Pressure? Like shoveling my own walk was pressure? Like cooking my own food, paying my own bills, living in my own skin? "I had it reviewed," I said quietly. "Legally, thoroughly." Her tone turned, not harsh, but tight. "After everything we've done for you?" There it was, the switch, the reminder that generosity, in their eyes, came with ownership. "I'm not signing it," I said. A click. She didn't slam the phone down. She just stopped talking. Odette stood behind me, arms folded. "She'll try again." "I know." We sat by the lamp while the sun set early behind gray clouds. I could feel the draft from the kitchen window. The house was old and stubborn, like its owner. I pulled my cardigan tighter and walked to the writing desk. There, I pulled out the Christmas cards I'd been working on. One for the girl at the diner, one for my old neighbor whose husband passed away in April, one for the church secretary who still calls me Mrs. Denham, even though Walter's been gone 15 years. Each envelope had a stamp and a name in my shaky but proud cursive. Each carried a simple note. "Thinking of you. Wishing you peace." Then I wrote one more. The final card I wrote that night was for Silas. It wasn't long, just a single sentence, written slowly, with care. "I love you, but love doesn't equal ownership." No flourish, no closing line. I sealed it before I could doubt myself. Odette offered to walk with me to the post office the next morning, but I declined. There are some things a woman has to do alone. It was bitterly cold, wind sharp as pins, and the sidewalk was slick with the thin glaze of freeze-over sleet. Still, I walked. Every step reminded me how easy it is to fall, and how much strength it takes not to. At the post office, Carol behind the desk smiled when she saw me. She reached under the counter for the little Christmas tin of peppermint sticks she always offered regulars this time of year. I handed her the envelope for Silas and the others. She asked if I wanted tracking. I shook my head. "If it's meant to reach him," I said, "it will." I spent the rest of the day indoors. Holleridge was quiet, quieter than usual. The local pastor came by that afternoon with a paper bag of shortbread and a smile that barely masked concern. He asked if I would be at the Christmas Eve gathering. "I'm sitting this one out," I told him. He looked surprised. "First time I'll see the choir without you in 40 years. I figured someone else could sing O Holy Night for once." He didn't press, just handed me the bag and said, "Peace to your home, Maureen." After he left, I set the shortbread on the kitchen counter and returned to the lamp. The light cast soft shadows across the living room. I hadn't decorated that year. No tree, no tinsel, not even the hand-painted ceramic village Walter loved. But the oil lamp flickered on, as it had every Christmas since he died. That was enough. The phone stayed silent until just after 7. The buzz startled me more than I'd admit. I picked up on the second ring. "They've filed something else," Enoch said. "We need to talk, in person." That evening, after I got off the phone with Enoch, I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to. I kept the kettle going, not because I wanted more tea, but because the sound of the bubbling water reminded me I was still present, still doing things for myself. Outside, snow had stopped falling, but the wind remained, scraping along the side of the house like fingers looking for a way in. I watched it from the back window, arms crossed, thinking about how people like Delilah often mistook politeness for permission. She assumed silence meant surrender. I suppose, for a long time, it did. But something about seeing my name pre-written on that deed, like I was an afterthought to my own life, had flipped a switch. No shouting, no storming, just an inner click, like a lock turning. I sat back down at the writing desk and pulled out one of Walter's old notebooks. The pages had gone yellow at the edges, and some were soft from time and humidity, but the spine still held. I wrote lists. Not the kind of lists Delilah might make. Investments, properties, client portfolios, but my kind. The kind with meaning no one else would see. I listed the winters I'd made it through without asking for help. The names of women who brought casseroles when Walter passed. The names of women who never did. The church fundraisers I ran. The curtains I hemmed for neighbors. The freezer I fixed myself by watching videos on a borrowed iPad. I wrote down the story of when Silas broke his arm in 3rd grade, and how I sat with him all night in the ER, reading him dinosaur facts from an old magazine until he laughed. I listed every Christmas I'd worked extra shifts at the library to afford his gifts. None of them extravagant, just thoughtful. Once, he'd wanted a wood-burning kit. I stayed up 2 nights practicing on scrap pine so I could show him how to use it. That list meant more to me than any Christmas card scented with department store nostalgia. Later that night, I walked to the back shed. It hadn't been opened since late October, when I stored away the gardening tools. The cold bit at my cheeks, and my boots crunched over ice patches on the old flagstones. Inside, it smelled of earth and oil. I pulled out a wooden crate from the far corner, dusted it off, and brought it into the house. It held every document that ever mattered to me: birth certificates, tax forms, Walter's discharge papers from the Navy, Silas's kindergarten drawings, and, wrapped in an old scarf, the original deed to the Holleridge property. It still bore Walter's handwriting. Paid in full, Maureen and Walter Denham, 1981. They wanted to say that love was tied to ownership. But what they'd never understand is that the only real ownership I ever wanted was that of my own decisions. I placed the deed gently back into the scarf and set it beside the oil lamp. In the distance, the church bell rang 8 times. I knew tomorrow would bring more moves from Delilah. She wasn't the kind to lose quietly, but I also knew she didn't understand the kind of silence I carried, the silence that held memories, names, meals cooked with nothing but potatoes and salt, the silence of someone who knew how to live on less, not because she wanted to, but because she had to, and survived anyway. I wore my best coat, brushed off the frost, and went to meet them. I wasn't scared. just tired of being polite. The wind had softened that morning, a hush settling over Hollow Ridge like a held breath. As I stepped into the law office, the smell of lemon polish greeted me first, too strong, like someone had tried to scrub something clean in a hurry. The receptionist offered a smile too wide to be sincere. "They're already inside, Mrs. Denham." Of course they were. I walked down the hallway, boots squeaking on the tile. I didn't try to muffle the sound. Inside the conference room, Delilah sat with one leg crossed precisely over the other, a leather folder open in front of her like a shield. Silas was beside her, hands clasped tight in his lap, eyes fixed on the decorative bowl of mints at the center of the table. The mediator sat at the far end, quiet, neutral, his hands folded and unreadable. No one stood up when I entered. That told me everything. Delilah's voice was warm, too warm. "Maureen, thank you for coming. We just want to ensure everyone's protected long term. This is about stewardship, about future care." She gestured to the documents in front of her like a magician revealing a trick. I sat, removed my gloves slowly, deliberately, said nothing. Silas cleared his throat but didn't look at me. We thought this might be easier, cleaner, no surprises." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Not yet. Delilah continued. "What we're suggesting is a form of joint ownership. You'd still have rights to reside on the property, of course, but the transfer would allow us to streamline care decisions should the need arise." It was a performance, every word choreographed to sound like concern, every phrase dipped in sweet varnish. But the varnish was cracking. I reached into my coat pocket and slid out a single envelope, placed it on the table, and pushed it forward with 2 fingers. "The revocation of power of attorney," I said. "Filed and recorded." Delilah blinked. Her hand twitched but didn't reach for the envelope. I looked at Silas. "I'm not under guardianship. I'm not confused. I'm not in danger. I'm not old in the way you've decided I am." He swallowed hard but still didn't speak. Delilah's smile tightened. "Maureen, no one's saying you are. This is just it's about convenience," I said, finally raising my voice. Not loud, just clear. "Yours, not mine." The mediator made a note. Still silent. Delilah leaned forward, her voice syrupy again. "You have to understand. Things have changed. There are costs to consider. Time, legal fees, taxes. We're trying to avoid unnecessary complications." I looked at her then, really looked. The pearls, the glossed lips, the practiced tilt of her head, the eyes that didn't blink often enough. "You wanted the land," I said slowly, "but I raised the man who built that fence with me. And you forgot that I still know how to say no." Delilah didn't flinch, but the corner of her mouth pulled tight like a drawstring. Silas turned to me, eyes glassy now, lips slightly parted. But still, he didn't speak. I stood up, tucking the now empty envelope back into my coat. No one stopped me. Outside, the cold bit into my cheeks like truth. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked across the parking lot. The sky had turned that peculiar shade of white-gray, like it couldn't decide whether to snow or not. I didn't rush. I never rush these days. Not for them, not for anyone. Behind me, the door clicked open. "Mom." His voice was soft, unsure. I turned. Silas stood just outside the building, his coat unbuttoned despite the cold breath coming out in little clouds. He took a few steps toward me. "Why are you doing this, Mom?" I looked at him, really looked. His face, so familiar and yet distant. The boy who once cried when his goldfish died. The man who now looked at me like I was a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. Because I remember who I was before I gave you everything. His mouth opened, then closed. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked to the car. Odette was already waiting inside with the heater running and the radio low, playing old Nat King Cole tunes. I got in, shut the door, and let the warmth settle into my bones. We didn't speak for the first few minutes of the drive. Finally, she glanced over. "You okay?" I nodded. "I think I've been okay this whole time. I just forgot." Back in town, I didn't go home right away. We pulled up to Maggie's diner and I told Odette I'd walk from there. She didn't argue, just handed me a folded grocery list and told me not to forget sugar. Inside the diner, the warmth wrapped around me like a well-worn quilt. The usual folks were there. Same seats, same conversations. The waitress smiled and said, "Back so soon, ma'am?" I slid into my usual booth by the window and ordered a slice of lemon meringue. Not because I wanted it, but because I could. While waiting, I looked out the frosted window. Across the street, the choir kids were gathered again, this time bundled up tighter. One of them waved at me. I waved back. The pie arrived, steaming slightly under the dome of whipped topping. I took a bite. It was too sweet, but I didn't mind. I didn't eat much of the pie. It wasn't about the taste. It was about the act of sitting, of reclaiming the quiet I had spent decades giving away in small, unnoticed increments. From the booth, I could hear the usual diner rhythm, the flick of menus closing, the sizzle of bacon someone had ordered too late in the day, the laughter of truckers swapping stories with sentences that never finished. I wasn't invisible there, but I wasn't on display either. I was just Maureen. That used to be enough. Lately, it felt like I needed a reminder. When the check came, I paid in cash, left a generous tip, and scribbled a small note on the back. "Merry Christmas, no strings." I stepped back outside. The air had shifted again. Less bitter now, more tired, like the town itself had exhaled. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't even sure I felt proud. Mostly, I felt still, and that stillness felt like a win. Walking home, I passed the little community board outside the library. Notices curled slightly at the edges from the cold. Lost mittens. Christmas Eve potluck schedules. A hand-lettered flyer asking for help moving snow for elderly residents. I smiled at that last one. Maybe I'd call the number after the holidays. When I got home, I changed into my softest sweater and wool socks, lit the oil lamp again, and sat at the kitchen table with a stack of old mail. Not because it needed sorting, but because I wanted to touch paper again. Real things, not digital. One envelope was from the power company. Another from a cousin I hadn't heard from since Walter passed. She sent a card every year without fail, always with the same message. "Hoping you're keeping warm, Maureen." I used to think she meant the furnace. Now I wondered if she meant the heart. Later that evening, I pulled out a worn recipe card from the drawer, Grandma Willa's cinnamon bread, and decided to bake. The kitchen is filled with the scent of brown sugar and memory. While the dough rose, I sat by the window with a blanket over my knees and watched the town fade into night. Porch lights flicked on one by one like someone gently reassembling the stars. I thought about Silas, about the first time he drove the tractor straight into the garden fence and cried for an hour because he thought Walter would never forgive him. About the way he held my hand when I got the call about my mother's stroke. About the birthday card he gave me at 12 with a scribbled message that read, "You're the only reason I exist." That boy didn't vanish. He just got quiet. Maybe too quiet. Just like me. The timer buzzed. I pulled the bread from the oven and let it rest. The crust cracked gently as it cooled. When I sliced it later, I wrapped half and placed it in the freezer. The other half I brought to Odette as still warm. I left it on her porch with a note. For tomorrow morning, don't you dare say it's too much. She texted a single heart emoji 5 minutes later. That was enough. I slept well that night. Not because everything was resolved, far from it, but because I had remembered how it felt to draw a line. And once you remember that, sleep comes easier. On January 3rd, the snow began to melt. I stood on my porch, tea in hand, and watched the icicles drip, one by one. It wasn't much of a thaw yet, but it was something. The kind of day that makes you wonder if the worst has passed or if it's just resting. Odette had told me once, years ago, while clearing off her windshield with the wrong side of a credit card. Winter always ends, but it doesn't ask permission first. That line came back to me now. Funny how the things you think are small at the time become anchors later. The mail arrived after lunch. Usual junk, a utility bill, and a single official-looking envelope from the county. I opened it at the kitchen table, slow and steady. My fingers didn't shake this time. Inside was a letter, black ink on crisp, white paper, confirming that the land was fully in my name. No liens, no shared custody of soil, no hidden signatures or digital shortcuts, just mine. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my old recipe binder. Not out of sentiment, just seemed like the safest place in the house. Later that afternoon, I put on my heaviest coat and walked into town. My boots splashed through soft puddles where snow had receded, the kind of mess that made you grateful for old shoes and stronger knees than expected. At the library, the community room had been set up for a poetry reading. Folded chairs in uneven rows, a table of instant coffee and 2 sweet cookies, and a microphone that buzzed faintly like it had a secret. I took a seat in the second row. Not in the back, not on the edge, just there. The poems weren't groundbreaking. One was about a dog named Waffles who liked snow boots. Another was about grief and soup, and how sometimes they taste the same. But there was warmth in the room, a kind of permission to show up exactly as you were. After the reading, I stopped by the front desk. The librarian, a woman in her 30s with bright eyes and fading nail polish, smiled and said, "Glad to see you again, Ms. Holloway." I hadn't realized she knew my name. "Planning to check anything out today?" she asked. "Maybe next time," I said. "I'm thinking about writing something of my own." That evening, Odette came by with a thermos of coffee and a bag of ginger snaps wrapped in wax paper. "I brought backup," she said, waving the cookies, "in case your pie experiment went sideways." We sat in the living room, legs curled beneath us, listening to the radiator pop and hum like an old storyteller. No crisis, no legal letters. Just quiet, the kind that used to fill days without notice and now felt like gold. We didn't talk about Silas or Delilah, not directly, but at one point, she glanced at the fridge, saw the card Silas had sent me last spring was still stuck up there, faded and curling at the edges. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. After she left, I washed the 2 mugs and dried them slowly. The phone buzzed once from the windowsill, a voicemail. No number I recognized right away, but I knew. I listened to it at the kitchen table. Silas's voice, soft, hesitant. "Hey, Mom, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't even know if it matters now. I didn't know everything. I let it happen, and I hate that I did." He paused. I could hear the wind in the background. Maybe he was outside, pacing, like he used to before final exams. "I miss you. I don't know what to say besides that. I'll wait for you to call, if you want. No pressure. Just, I'm here." I didn't delete it. I didn't call back either. Instead, I pulled out the old flannel blanket from the hall closet and stepped outside. The porch boards creaked beneath my weight, the same way they always had. The moon was brighter than expected, and the air had that sharp New Year scent, like the first page of a book no one had written yet. I walked the edge of the property, slow, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel each step. The pine trees stood still, and the frost on the fence glinted like it remembered too. When I reached the old post at the back corner, the one Silas and I had hammered in together the summer he turned 15, I placed my hand on it. "Still mine," I whispered. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Back inside, I turned off every light but one in the kitchen, set a fresh cup of tea next to the notebook I'd been saving. The cover was plain, blue linen, frayed at the spine, but the pages were crisp. I opened the first one, wrote slowly, each letter clear. Chapter 1. What comes after surviving? Then I underlined it. Twice. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock on the front door. It was Jeremy from down the road, maybe 12 years old now, red cheeks, hair sticking out from under his knit cap. He held a small basket wrapped in plaid cloth. "Mom says thanks for the pie," he said. "She said to give this to you. It's banana bread. She made too much." I took the basket, smiled at him. "Tell her I said it smells like Saturday mornings." He grinned. "That's what she calls it, too." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and peeled back the cloth. It really did smell like Saturdays, of burnt toast and AM radio, of Silas at age 6, barefoot and giggling as he chased the dog down the hallway. That was long before school pickups and tax paperwork and broken fences, before the idea of legacy turned into a transaction. Later that day, I walked into town again. This time not for mail or confrontation, but for light bulbs and dish soap. At the hardware store, people greeted me by name. I hadn't realized how long I'd gone without that. Maybe I had pulled away more than I thought. At checkout, I bumped into Mr. Henley, who used to teach shop class before his knees gave out. He looked older now, don't we all? But his voice still had that rusted warmth. "Heard you were at the library event," he said. I nodded. "Have you ever thought about teaching something again?" he asked. "Not full-time, just folks around here miss your stories." I didn't answer right away, but it stayed with me, that offer dressed up like small talk. Back home, I cleaned out the back bedroom. Not the kind of cleaning you do when company's coming, but the kind you do when it's time to let go. I boxed up old sweaters no longer mine in shape or memory, folded linens that had lived too long in closets, put aside a few picture frames to dust and hang again, faces I wasn't ready to give up on. In one drawer, I found a small cloth-bound journal with pressed flowers on the cover. It was empty, except for the first page. Silas's handwriting, age 10, blocky letters, too careful. "To Mom, so you never forget how much I love you." The ink was faded, but not enough to hide the truth of it. I closed the book and held it against my chest. That night, Odette called. She asked if I'd heard anything else from the West Coast delegation, as she liked to call them now. "No," I said, "but I think that's okay." "I was thinking," she said after a pause, "we should bring back the old New Year's potluck next week. Nothing fancy, just folks. You in?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because the version of me that used to host those things felt like a different woman. Still, maybe that was the point. "Yeah," I said. "Count me in." After we hung up, I sat with a pen in hand, notebook open beside me. I haven't written anything yet. Just let the silence sit. Some silences don't ask to be filled. They just make space for what's next. The thaw came slow that winter, but it came. I'd stand on the porch most mornings, cradling my cup of tea, watching the icicles melt, one drop at a time. There was a rhythm to it, like the world was slowly exhaling after holding its breath far too long. Inside, the house was quiet. No phone ringing, no voices debating legal documents, no forced toasts or glittering hotel chandeliers. Just the hum of the old radiator and the occasional crack of wood in the stove. That silence, well, it wasn't lonely. It was a kind of peace I'd almost forgotten how to hold. After everything, I started making small changes, rearranged the pantry, donated coats I hadn't worn in years, even signed up to volunteer at the library's weekly poetry hour. Nothing big, just reminders that my days were mine again. A letter arrived on the 3rd of January, official looking, but simple. The county had processed the revocation. The land was fully in my name, no disputes pending, no oversight requested. I stared at the letter for a long time, not because I doubted it, but because that single page represented something no amount of holiday money could buy. Clarity. I didn't call Silas. Not right away. He had left me a voicemail on Christmas Day. I listened to it twice. His voice was quiet, tired. He said he didn't know what to say, but that he was sorry. Said he never meant to make me feel small, that he hadn't realized how far things had gone until they'd gotten out of hand. I didn't delete it, just saved it for later. I wasn't ready to speak, but I wasn't ready to shut the door either. Delilah never called. No surprise there. I baked a pie for the girls at the diner that week. Cherry, with a lattice crust. Left it on the counter without a note. Just something nice, because I could. Because I wanted to. Odette dropped by more often after the holidays, brought coffee and old gossip, called me warrior woman, and refused to let me sink into silence. We laughed, harder than I thought we could, after everything. It's strange how life moves forward, even when part of you stays standing on some snowy sidewalk in a too warm coat, facing the people who once called you the heart of the family. I don't think there's a victory lap at the end of stories like mine. No cinematic redemption, no big speech in front of a crowd. Just decisions. Quiet ones. Brave ones. One foot in front of the other. The truth is, I used to believe sacrifice was the highest form of love, that the more I gave up, the more I proved I cared. But I've learned something since. When you forget to care for yourself, when you let people believe your silence means agreement, you teach them to overlook you, and sometimes they do. I don't think my son meant to hurt me, not really. I think he got tired, distracted, trusted the wrong voice too many times. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause waves, but silence is a kind of permission, and I've stopped granting it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just awake. That land, that old fence I walked with Silas when he was 10, it's still mine. Not just on paper, but in the way I carry myself now, in the way I say no, in the way I remember I built something once, and I can still rebuild if I need to. There are others like me, I know, women, men too, who gave decades to family, only to wake up one day feeling erased, like a coat hung behind the door no one reaches for anymore. But here's what I'll say to you. If you're listening, you matter. You're not done. And it's not selfish to protect what's yours, not bitter to want to be seen. There's an old oil lamp I keep on the table now, my late husband's. I light it some nights, not because I need the light, but because it reminds me. Even when power is stripped away, a single flame can still burn steady, can still warm a room. We don't always get apologies. We don't always get justice in headlines, but we get choices. And if life gives you one more chance to write your story differently, take it. This is mine.